there, another Ask Shawna answer coming to you from Villanova. All right, this question comes from Claire, and it says, I've been using your method with a young horse. I'm starting under saddle. The groundwork stuff is going great with the clicker, but in the past, he has been known to spook from the rider, will panic and take off. He has gotten a couple of riders off this way. I'm hoping to use the positive reinforcement to help him through. Can you help me with how you would approach this problem using positive reinforcement? I find as he gets tense and starts to panic, he goes first inside himself, a key point, and I won't respond to my efforts to relax him. Thanks in advance. Okay, Claire, and this is a great question, and why I said that was a key point, that going inside himself creates a different tendency in the horses. So a horse that tends to go inside themselves, I realize I have to be really, really paying attention to the smallest little triggers, because basically what you probably have going on there is trigger stacking. So he sees something and he's gotten riders off in the past. I don't know if you've been a part of that, or if it's all just been traditional training, or what that's looked like. We don't know a lot of times, what really has happened all through those times. But I imagine at some point in time, something, and sometimes it's just their nature, that they are kind of, I just keep it in. That's just what I tend to do. I mean, I've seen it pass from, father to son who've never seen each other, so that kind of thing can happen. But sometimes it's taught, so sometimes they go, oh, what's that? And then they get corrected through traditional training. I mean, that's normal. The horse does that. You're like, get back to work. And so then they start thinking, okay, I'm back to work, but it doesn't mean that they have let go of whatever that thing that worried them was. So sometimes they have learned not to show us their precursors to the worry. So they just go from to I can't handle it, and so they don't show us the in-between where they're kind of like, what's that? This is starting to cause duress for me, and we don't see that whole process. So that's a thing I never want to get into, but sometimes it is their nature that they just go, I'll just keep it all inside until they have themselves over threshold. There are times I'm trying to teach a horse to go into a trailer, and I know that that's their nature, is to overdo it and then spook themselves. So I'm like, I don't want you in the trailer. Even though you'll go, I know you're mentally not ready for it. So regardless, that horse that goes inside themselves, I'm very, very, very diligent to try to feel the slightest little adjustment, the slightest little worry. The head goes up, half an inch, all those little things that I can really look for. So I'm going to assume that more things are worrisome than they're going to let me know. Because how you said he wouldn't respond to your cues that he typically would relax to, that help him to relax, that tells me that he was too far gone. He was over threshold. He's over his fear threshold, his stimulus threshold, and he can't really process information. That's not a good place for learning. So what we want to do is try and keep him below that threshold, but you have a little challenge there because he's not showing you where that initial start of starting to worry is. So now it's going to be on you, and it's trickier. It's tricky for anybody. But so what I do is I assume. I would rather assume that the whole world is worrisome than not assume and then have them go over threshold and get worried or have somebody get hurt. So I try to assume, that manhole cover may have been more worrisome than I know. So I'm going to reinforce you for it. So I work on it like I would any systematic desensitization and counter conditioning. Basically despooking or working on the dealing with reactivity at all sorts of things. So while I may not know for sure, I'm going to act like it is more worrisome than it is. So I'd work on some despooking exercises and carry those over to under saddle. And there's a reason I want to go there, and it's because it is basically, I want to teach them. So your horse sounds to me like he sees new things, new sights, new sounds, new situations, and thinks potential for death. I mean, that's kind of how they think. They think it's danger involved. They're not just thinking, oh, I don't know what it is. They're thinking, oh, I have to flee because I might die. And I mean, I think it's very important that we acknowledge that their fear is real. It is truly their fear. That is their reality. Even though we may go, it's just a manhole cover, but to them, the reality is it's quite scary. So we need to say, okay, I hear you. I get how you feel about that. And let me see if we can't help each other to get past this point. So I try to recognize and anticipate that fear is going on underneath there, even though they're not overtly showing it. So by using, and so basically new things, new sights, new sounds, unfamiliar sight, sounds, situations can to them predict that bad things may happen. And so that's their worry, is that they think, and it's, to be honest with you, a lot of horses are kind of neophobic, being afraid of new things, new sights, new sounds, new situations. And that's their nature, or they've learned it through some of the training. So what I want to do is change that. I want them to see new sights, new sounds, new things as a potential for reinforcement. So instead of going, oh, what is that? I want them to go, huh, oh, okay, well, what is that? Maybe it's good. And I'm going to teach them to explore and investigate and tap into their curiosity a bit. So that is a little bit of a process. So while the situation may specifically be when we're out on the trail, in this one trail, or when we're in a certain arena, or we're in a certain part of the arena, or whatever it might be, it's still, we can start working on the concept of new sight, sound situations to be a good thing. So I will start to introduce them, not with a rider at first. We don't need to go all the way there yet. And let me get to that in a minute. So we don't need to go all the way there yet, but I can also start to introduce those things just in their world. I can hang a jacket on the fence. Can we just walk by it? I mean, liberty lead by it. And maybe we have to liberty lead 20 feet away, and I reinforce as we're closest to it, and they get closer and closer and closer. And so there are ways to do that, but what we want to do is help them to learn that the sights and the sounds of and new situations, new horses, new things, unfamiliar, is actually safer. It's safer than they think, and we want them to look at it and think it's a potential for reinforcement. So I would really recommend, one, you've got to pay attention and know that the nature is to kind of keep it inside. So you need to assume a little bit. And then I go through the systematic desensitization and counter conditioning, and I would do it under saddle too. But since there's this place where they can get too big out of the blue, then you don't want to be having him continually dealing with something that he finds more scary than not. And I want to add, with traditional training, for some horses, it can keep them a little bit on guard. They don't know when they might get corrected. They don't know when, things, it's not based in positive reinforcement. Traditional training isn't. That's just the nature of it. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it, for some horses, if they're a sensitive horse, and those internal ones, I have found, those internalizers, I have found tend to be more sensitive than not. So there's so much that they just keep it inside more, because the whole world is like that. So if it's pretty calm, then they go, what's that? It's one thing is scary. But if the whole world is they're really sensitive and reactive to it, a lot of times there's too much to react to. So they have a tendency to not react to everything. So I think that sometimes when we're using the positive or the traditional training and we're not using positive reinforcement, sometimes things that work for a lot of horses, for a sensitive horse, might feel like a lot, and can get them a little trigger stacked from the get-go. So by taking the rider out of the equation, saying, let's just deal with it on the ground first, and then let's deal with it with the rider next, that might be, that's where I would go with this. And what I'm going to direct you to is to the podcast. I don't even know, my podcast, Equine Clicker 101. There's an episode in there about despooking and reactivity. I don't remember the name of the lesson right now, but if you go to Equine Clicker, go to my website, ShawnaKarrasch.com. You'll find, vianova.com. They're merged together, and you can, on my side, go to the page that says podcast, and there's a list of all the podcasts. At the bottom, you can search subjects a bit. So search through there, and you're going to find the one that's on despooking. That'll give you kind of some exercises that you can work through. And there's also some ways that you can do, there's other things you can do, like the under saddle work. There's another one called I don't know. It's called, it's about under saddle work and giving them spooky horses in particularly, because naturally I've dealt with those type where I give them a nice, like you talked about, a behavior that's one of their favorite behaviors. So they start to go, what's that? You can say, hey, can you bend? And he goes, yes. And we can get them back to a place where they're choosing to work with us. So that's another episode I think that will dovetail nicely with that. So those are where I would recommend you go. Claire, I hope that this helps you out and gives you some things to think about. And there you go, food for thought. All righty. If you have more questions, I would love you to just get a hold of me again. For those of you who don't know how to get a hold of me, I want you to go to, you can go to shawnakarrasch.com, and on there's a tab. And again, it's with the Villanova, but there's a tab that says Ask Shawna. And you can go there and you can submit the answers there, or the questions there. And that's a great way to go. So I can get a chance to answer some of your questions too. So there you go. I hope this helped. I hope this gave you some food for thought and helps in a bigger picture even, because these exercises can help for so much more than just the ridden work. I mean, that's a big part of it, but it helps a horse in general to get to a better mental state. And I think that's really important when they're emotionally more balanced, and that it just helps them be happier and us be happier, and helps them to be better at learning, and being able to learn from their new environment. All righty, that's it for now. Till next time. Bye.